There's nothing better than Kol Nidre second service speaking to all of you fine people at 10:03 p.m. Now, my mother of blessed memory used to say, he, meaning me, I was very quiet apparently until I was 4, and then, and I quote her, may she rest in peace, and then I never shut up, apparently. She used to tell that to people. If she was here right now, she'd be thinking, he can even talk at 10:03 p.m. But I wanted to tell you that, and I'll go back up there. I know you're very uncomfortable. The space has been violated. What's he doing down here? Thank you very much. You want me to have a seat? You know, I'll go back up in a second. But I do want to thank Cheryl again and thank our board members for helping out, and of course for all of you. I know how important it is for all of us to be part of a congregation, part of the Reform movement, part of the greater Jewish people, but I never really understood all of it until I lived in Jerusalem, which was during my first year of rabbinic school in 1990-91, when I got to live in Jerusalem, in the center, the epicenter of the Jewish world. I really think that everything started to make sense to me as a Jewish person. And spending a year in Jerusalem, going through all of the holy days, seeing all of the different vendors and shop owners and having neighbors and living amongst Israelis makes you understand and feel more Jewish than probably anywhere other than maybe Camp Stein that you can feel Jewish. It's not just the epicenter spiritually, but we know, according to Jewish tradition, there are two Jerusalems. There's a Yerushalayim Shalom Ma'ala, an upper spiritual Jerusalem that we all think about and dream about and feel whenever we see pictures of Israel or see a documentary or read a book about Israel. That's that upper Kishka's soul stuff. And then there's the lower Jerusalem. That is the place that we access when we go visit and we walk around and see the cobblestone streets and the Jerusalem stone. This is 2017 in our secular calendar, but it's also a year that ends in a 7 that has so many incredible Israel tie-ins, including the fact that this is the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War in 1967. I mean, think about it. 50 years ago, Jerusalem, both the spiritual Jerusalem and the physical Jerusalem, were not only reunified, but brought back into the Jewish fold as the central heartbeat, soul of the Jewish people for the first time in thousands of years. By the way, I said that 7s were important as well, just as a side note. 2017 is also the 120th anniversary of the First Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. That was in 1897. It is exactly 100 years since the signing of the Balfour Declaration. In fact, that'll be on November 2nd. In just over 1 month will be the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Balfour Declaration. And we celebrated 70 years of the first UN vote to establish a Jewish state in 1947. So these years ending in 7, which is also a very Jewish number, 7, as you know, has some other spiritual significance that I'm not going to go into, but I did find it interesting in preparing to speak a little bit about 1967. You know, Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Israel, decided to commission a piece of music. Everyone's heard of Teddy Kollek, of course. He was the most famous mayor. I mean, you think of famous mayors, you think of Teddy Kollek. And he wanted to commission a special song from Israeli musicians for Independence Day in 1967. He must have known something was going on because this was about a month or so before the Six-Day War, in honor of, at that time, Israel's 19th anniversary or birthday, if you will, of independence. They had only had one other event called the Israel Song Festival, and it was being hosted in Jerusalem that year. Everyone who Teddy Kollek asked said no. They didn't want to do it. They were intimidated. It was too challenging. And if you were an artist in 67, after 48, you didn't know how to write about the disparity that you felt in the Jewish spirit of living in Israel and being independent in Israel, but not being able to go to the Western Wall, not being able to climb Mount Scopus, not being able to walk the streets that our ancestors walked. And then along came a woman named Naomi Shemer. And Naomi Shemer accepted Teddy Kollek's invitation to write a song about this very fraught subject of Jerusalem pre-1967. And she called her song Jerusalem of Gold, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. In the slumber of tree and stone, hostage to her dream, the first verse declared, is the city that sits alone, while in her heart there lies a wall. And then came the now well-known refrain, Jerusalem of gold and of bronze and of light, behold, for all your songs I am the violin. Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, V'shel Nechoshech, V'shel Or. Most Jews know how to sing those words. We don't know where we learned it, but it creeps into our hearts. And she played on this hole, this feeling of isolation that was created by the fact that Jerusalem stood alone and was still not part of the Jewish spirit, was part of the Jewish spirit, but not part of the Jewish identity because we couldn't access it, or Israelis couldn't access it. And then within weeks, if not just a month or so, of her writing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, 15,000 Egyptians with 100 tanks started piling up in the Sinai. The United States and France and Britain basically told the Israeli authorities, led by, at that time, its foreign minister, Abba Eban, don't fire the first shot, and basically, you're on your own. Even though they had agreements from the 57 war and the 48 war, Lyndon Johnson was busy with Vietnam. De Gaulle, who was no big fan of Israel, had those famous words that he said to Israel, basically saying, it's now 1967, we're not going to coddle or babysit you anymore, this isn't 1957 or 1948. And Britain, who also, of course, the UN, did not want to take care of Israel nor claim having Israel's back. And right before the 67 war, the American Jewish community woke up. Imagine, if you will, 150,000 people attended rallies in New York City and in Washington, D.C. AIPAC was created in 67. And the UJA, that is the United Jewish Appeal, in that year alone raised $307 million to be sent to help support Israel. The situation was also very dire. Israel did not have the strongest voice in its prime minister. But on the morning of June 5th, after a 12-5 Knesset cabinet vote, this is 50 years ago, about 10:35 a.m., in the first morning of the first day of the Six-Day War, Yitzhak Rabin, a name we've heard of, received a simple report from his generals. Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon were all waiting to pounce on Israel, and by 10:30 in the morning, this was the report. The Egyptian Air Force has ceased to exist. Now, Israel suffered many losses in the days that would follow, but the IDF leadership understood what had just happened. Israel had essentially won the war before it even started. By 1150, an hour later, 50 years ago, Jordanian, Syrian, and Iraqi planes attacked Israel, but in 2 hours, the IAF shot down or repelled all of them. On June 5th alone, in 1967, Israel destroyed 400 combined Arab planes. It had land dominance, it had air dominance. Within a few hours of that, the IDF command issued the order to send 2 battalions into Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, into the Old City. And in one of the greatest moments in the history of the Jewish people, 50 years ago, Rabbi Shlomo Goren walked in to the Old City again. Although they could hear the shelling on the far side of the city in West Jerusalem, which had been in Israeli hands since 1948, the capital that had been so violent for so long was now silent in just 6 days. And Rabbi Shlomo Goren, in that famous moment, having heard that we have reclaimed the Old City, takes his Torah and his shofar in hand, and he's so emotional he can't even sound the shofar, that another one of the soldiers has to do it. No longer, for the first time in thousands of years, the Temple Mount and the Western Wall were in sovereign Jewish hands. You know, these aren't just stories, and there aren't just coincidences and history. I know I gave you a little bit of a history lesson tonight. These stories mean something to us, whether we've been to Israel or not. One of the beautiful parts of Naomi Shemer's song are words that she quickly wrote down after Jerusalem had been reconquered. We've returned to the water hole, she wrote, to the market and the square. A shofar calls from the Temple Mount and the Old City, and in the caves and the rock, thousands of suns shine. We will once more return to the Dead Sea, and this time we will do so by the road of Jericho. Can you imagine what it was like to be there? To see the rabbi go up into the Old City, into the center of the soul of Jewish history and of the Jewish spirit after 2,000 years with shofar and Torah in hand. But there is something symbolic about the reclaiming and reunification of Jerusalem for us on this Yom Kippur, not just a lesson in history and not just words about how holy Jerusalem is for us as people. It is this idea that we can overcome, that the new Jew, which was defined in those days and weeks leading up to the 67 Six-Day War, that this new Jew, the sign of a Jew as empowered and powerful and strong and capable of never giving up and of never giving in, that is also a message for us on Yom Kippur as we try to fix our souls. So many of us feel broken. So many feel that our challenges are insurmountable. So many of us feel like it's been a hard year and that this year's not going to be much better. But I think we can learn from the events of 50 years ago, especially as they pertain to Jerusalem, that nothing is too hard for us to conquer. It doesn't matter how many enemies stand at our gates, we can overcome too. On a personal level, on a spiritual level, the Jerusalem of the soul and the spirit and the Jerusalem of the soil are connected to us, and we are connected to it. This isn't just about visiting Israel, which you should do. It's about understanding what it means to stand on holy ground and be able to say, as Jews, that the future will be much different than the past. That there is hope and a sense of purpose and a sense of strength. As we consider the powerful implications of 50 years since the reunification of Jerusalem, I think we should commit ourselves anew to the reunification of the Jewish spirit, both from within and from without. Of course, we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we should look all around at a world that is upside down, at countries, nations who want nothing more than our destruction, to the anti-Semitism that we see and the fear-mongering that we hear, and say, we are new Jews. We won't accept anything but the unification of a city and of a Jewish spirit. You cannot harm us. You will not harm us as individuals in a collective. Let us remember what this represents symbolically. The land of Israel, the people of Israel, the state of Israel, it's more than just war and conflict. It's more than just about conflicts and oppression and the anti-Semitism that comes to define the many of the reasons we think of Israel and Jerusalem are important. This event 50 years ago represents the rebirth in many, many senses of the Jewish people. And it's up to us, it's up to each one of us to never forget, to zachor, that Jerusalem is both a place and a state of mind. As we mark 50 years since the Six-Day War, let us recommit ourselves to Jerusalem, to Israel, to the idea and ideals that we are strong and capable and resilient, and that the future of the Jewish people and of the Jewish state are in our hands. Good Yom Tov.